A man walks into a federal detention facility. He is, at that moment, the most high-profile prisoner in the United States. Guards are instructed to check on him every 30 minutes. 2 cameras outside his cell are both somehow malfunctioning at the exact same time. His cellmate is transferred out hours before his death. And by the morning of August 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein is dead. The official ruling, suicide. Case closed. Resolved. But here is what they didn't tell the public. The medical examiner who first examined the body flagged multiple injuries more consistent with homicidal strangulation than hanging. The guards on duty that night had falsified their log entries. And a man who had spent decades trafficking children to the most powerful people in the world would never sit in a witness chair. Not once. The question isn't just how he died. The question is, who was protected when he did? According to the official record, Jeffrey Edward Epstein was arrested on July 6, 2019, on federal charges of sex trafficking of minors in Florida and New York. The indictment alleged that between 2002 and 2005, Epstein sexually abused dozens of underage girls, some as young as 14, at his Manhattan townhouse and his Palm Beach estate. Federal prosecutors described a sophisticated and deliberate operation, a network of recruiters who lured vulnerable young girls, often from broken homes, into Epstein's orbit under the pretense of legitimate employment. Epstein was held without bail at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, designated a high suicide risk following what authorities called a prior attempt on July 23rd. 2 weeks later, he was removed from suicide watch. The Bureau of Prisons would later claim this was a standard medical decision made by qualified professionals. On August 10, 2019, Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell at approximately 6:30 in the morning. He was transported to New York Presbyterian Hospital where he was pronounced dead. The New York City medical examiner ruled the cause of death as suicide by hanging. Attorney General William Barr stated publicly that there had been, quote, serious irregularities at the facility, but assured the public that the FBI and the Justice Department's Inspector General were investigating. The case, as far as federal courts were concerned, was functionally over, resolved. The survivors who had waited years for their day in court had to watch it end, not in a verdict, but in a body bag. If you believe the system should be held accountable, hit the like button right now and subscribe so we can keep exposing these hidden cases. This channel exists because people like you demand the truth. Now let's talk about what the official narrative conveniently omits. Because the gap between the resolved version and the documented evidence is not a crack, it is a canyon. Start with the guards. Officers Tova Noel and Michael Thomas were the 2 MCC correctional officers assigned to monitor Epstein on the night of his death. According to federal records and their subsequent indictment, both officers falsified their log entries, recording checks they never performed. Investigators found they had been awake but not making rounds, with one officer reportedly browsing furniture listings online and the other sleeping at his desk for hours. They were later indicted on charges of falsifying records and lying to federal investigators. Both eventually had their charges dropped in 2021 after prosecutors cited the officers' cooperation and the difficulty of proceeding to trial. Let that settle for a moment. The 2 people directly responsible for monitoring the most important prisoner in America on the night he died had their criminal charges dropped. Then there are the cameras. The Bureau of Prisons confirmed that 2 cameras positioned outside Epstein's cell malfunctioned on that specific night. A backup recording was found later, but was from the wrong tier of the facility. The Justice Department's own Inspector General described the camera failure as the result of technical issues, but provided no further technical explanation to the public. No engineer was named. No maintenance log was released. And then there is the forensic evidence itself. Dr. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother Mark, examined the body and publicly disputed the official ruling. Baden noted the presence of hemorrhages in Epstein's eyes and multiple fractures to the hyoid bone and the cartilage of the thyroid. Injuries, he stated, were, in his professional opinion, more consistent with homicidal strangulation than self-inflicted hanging. The city medical examiner, Dr. Barbara Sampson, acknowledged the fractures, but maintained her ruling of suicide, citing the full body of evidence. 2 qualified medical examiners. 2 different conclusions. One of them was paid by the government. only one ruling became official. But the story of how the system protected power doesn't begin on August 10, 2019. It begins in 2008 in a Palm Beach courtroom, in a deal that investigators and survivors would later call one of the most corrupt prosecutorial agreements in American legal history. Jeffrey Epstein had been under investigation by Palm Beach police since 2005. Detectives had compiled evidence of systematic sexual abuse involving more than 30 underage girls. The case was referred to federal prosecutors in the Southern District of Florida. The lead federal prosecutor was Alexander Acosta, and what Acosta's office produced was not an indictment. It was a non-prosecution agreement, a secret plea deal in which Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state charges of soliciting prostitution, served 13 months in county jail with extraordinary work release privileges that allowed him to leave 6 days a week, and received immunity from all federal charges. Immunity, not just for himself, for any potential co-conspirators. The Miami Herald, through years of investigative reporting led by journalist Julie K. Brown, exposed the full scope of that deal in 2018. Her investigation revealed that Acosta's team had negotiated the agreement in secret, intentionally keeping Epstein's victims uninformed, a direct violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. A federal judge would later rule in 2019 that prosecutors had indeed violated that act. It was a ruling that should have triggered consequences. Instead, it triggered nothing of immediate significance to the survivors. Acosta, who by that time had become President Trump's Secretary of Labor, resigned from the cabinet in July 2019, 1 week after Epstein's arrest, claiming he wanted to ensure his past decisions would not distract from the department's work. He was never criminally charged. He was never disbarred. The Palm Beach state attorney at the time, Barry Krischer, had also been criticized for initially declining to pursue the case aggressively before it was handed to federal prosecutors. He too faced no legal consequence. The pattern is exact and deliberate. Powerful men making decisions that protected a predator. Powerful men walking away clean. Her name is Courtney Wild. She was 14 years old when she was first brought to Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. She had been recruited by a classmate who told her she could earn money giving massages. What followed was years of sexual abuse. She reported it to police. She cooperated with investigators. She was told that federal prosecutors were building a real case that would hold Epstein fully accountable. Then she learned about the secret deal. She learned she had been deliberately excluded from the process, that federal law required she be notified and consulted, and that the prosecutors who were supposed to protect her had instead protected the man who abused her. Courtney Wild became a plaintiff in the lawsuit, arguing that the non-prosecution agreement violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act. She spent years in court simply trying to be heard. She gave media interviews with visible distress, describing what it felt like to discover that the system had not just failed her, it had been deliberately arranged to minimize accountability for her abuser. And she was not alone. Investigators ultimately identified more than 80 victims connected to Epstein across multiple states and countries. Many of them waited more than a decade for a real day in court. Some came forward publicly describing abusers who had never faced charges, powerful men whose names appear in Epstein's flight logs and contact books, but who have never been prosecuted. The human cost of 2008 is not theoretical. It is Courtney Wild sitting in a deposition room, explaining to a judge that she found out about the deal that erased her case from a newspaper. It is every woman who came forward again in 2019, prepared to finally testify, only to see that possibility die in a federal detention cell. Grief, re-traumatization, and institutional silence. That is the real sentence the system imposed. What the Epstein case ultimately reveals is not a single act of corruption. It is a map of how institutions systematically protect concentrated power and who gets left behind when they do. Begin with prosecutorial discretion weaponized as a shield. The 2008 non-prosecution agreement was not a mistake or an oversight. Acosta's team had internal communications revealing they were aware of the scope of Epstein's crimes. The decision to offer a sweetheart deal, one sealed from the victims, one granting immunity to unnamed co-conspirators, was a choice, a deliberate, documented, legally questioned choice made by officials with the full authority of the federal government behind them. Then consider the decades of institutional access that allowed Epstein to operate. He was a registered sex offender who nonetheless maintained connections to political figures, academics, royalty, and corporate leaders. His foundation, his relationships, and his wealth gave him access to circles that provided social armor. When institutions, universities, research centers, elite social networks welcomed Epstein back after his 2008 conviction, they were not naive. They were making a calculation about what kind of power was worth protecting. Then consider what happened to Ghislaine Maxwell. Epstein's longtime associate was convicted in December 2021 of sex trafficking and related charges. She is currently serving a 20-year sentence, but her trial and the evidence presented within it named powerful men, referenced co-conspirators, described a trafficking network that served multiple clients. And as of this writing, not one of those clients has faced federal criminal charges. Maxwell is in prison. The network she served is not. This is the systemic failure. Not one bad actor, not one corrupt prosecutor. A structure, legal, institutional, and social, that absorbs individual accountability and expels it before it reaches those with the most to lose. Victims are told to trust the process. The process was designed for someone else. If you have watched this far, you already understand why this work matters. The Epstein case did not end in justice. It ended in a sealed courtroom, a falsified log, and 80+ survivors who were told again and again to wait for accountability that kept being rerouted away from power. Share this video. Send it to someone who still believes the system corrects itself. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this case you believe deserves further investigation, because this channel reads every single one. And if you are new here, subscribe now, because this is what we do. We go back into the resolved cases and we find what was left out. The names of Epstein's survivors deserve to be spoken. Their testimony deserves to be centered. And the officials who engineered a decade of impunity deserve to be named in every public record we can find. The story is based on publicly available court documents, federal indictments, the reporting of the Miami Herald's investigative team, Inspector General reports, congressional testimony, and on-record statements from named officials and forensic experts. Some narrative reconstruction has been used for clarity and spoken word flow. All research and editorial decisions are human-led. Nothing in this script is fabricated. Every institutional failure described here is documented. The system called this case resolved. The evidence says otherwise.